Breaking inside Cleveland. Browns owner Jimmy Haslam just exploded on Kevin Stefanski after the coach flat-out refused to name Shedeur as the team's QB2. Reports say Haslam stormed out of a closed-door meeting, shouting that this decision makes zero sense. The front office is divided, the fans are livid, and the quarterback controversy in Cleveland just hit nuclear levels.
Well, I thought from the beginning that the fingerprints of Jimmy Haslam were all over this. I know, Jason, me and you disagree, but when Andrew Berry is seen in that war room, just his body language, that did not seem like a guy who wanted to draft him in round 5.
Here's where I'll agree with you now, Steve. For them to be holding on to him right now, given everything we've seen, that's got to be the owner more than the general manager.
Yeah.
Breaking inside Cleveland. Browns owner Jimmy Haslam just exploded on Kevin Stefanski after the coach flat-out refused to name Shedeur as the team's QB2. Reports say Haslam stormed out of a closed-door meeting, shouting that this decision makes zero sense. The front office is divided, the fans are livid, and the quarterback controversy in Cleveland just hit nuclear levels.
Let's play SOT 6.
Trade took us by surprise. That was not something that we saw coming. They called us, and it happened very fast and happened not too long ago. So still working through all roster type of things. I always have to be mindful of our players and our players' development, and I want to make sure that I'm always doing what's best for our players and, of course, our team. But, with young players, I'm always thinking about last week making the change to Dylan. You have to think long and hard about that, because these are young players that you're so invested in their development. So I'll let the week play out and make a decision later on that.
Not an immediate...
Look, we need to talk about what just happened in Cleveland, because this press conference was absolutely insane. Kevin Stefanski gets hit with what should be the easiest question in the world. Hey, coach, is Shedeur your backup quarterback? And instead of giving a straight answer, this man went into full politician mode.
Reading between the lines, it seems to me he's saying this kid's not ready, and I don't want to play him. And at least Bailey Zappi, say what you want, he's been an NFL journeyman. He does have NFL snaps under his belt. And it's clear to me that the coach, again, just my opinion, is saying if I had to put Shedeur in there, we would absolutely have no shot at moving the ball. And maybe this is his way of protecting him. Because like you said, Jason, this is a no-win situation. If he succeeds, everyone's going to say, why didn't he play to begin with? But if he fails, it's like, well, they put him in a position to fail. I think Stefanski's in a real catch-22 here.
TJ, to me, if they can't say definitively today, hey, he's our number 2, that's an indictment of Shedeur.
He's talking about how the trade took us by surprise and happened very fast, and how he's still working through all roster type of things. Bro, it's week 6. The trade happened days ago.
Well, I thought from the beginning that the fingerprints of Jimmy Haslam were all over this. I know, Jason, me and you disagree, but when Andrew Berry is seen in that war room, just his body language, that did not seem like a guy who wanted to draft him in round 5.
Here's where I'll agree with you now, Steve. For them to be holding on to him right now, given everything we've seen, that's got to be the owner more than the general manager.
Yeah.
TJ, you, no, yes?
You're telling me you don't know who your QB2 is? That's like showing up to a test and being like, yeah, I'm still working through whether I studied or not. But here's where it gets real interesting. Stefanski keeps saying he has to be mindful of our players and our players' development, and how he wants to make sure I'm always doing what's best for our players. And look, on the surface, that sounds great, right? Coach looking out for his guys.
I think. Remember, I told you the story, and it was a verified story later on, and perhaps overstated, but it may have been Dan Wetzel. I can't remember who reported it, but that Haslam listened to a homeless guy, and that's why he drafted Johnny Manziel. I'm saying this is a weird owner. He does weird things. That's a verified story. Go look it up. You will see it. So if he wants Shedeur Sanders and he wants to be best friends with Dion, is it totally out of the realm of possibility that he would be saying, no, we're keeping him, and we're keeping him as our third stringer until I say so, and then we're going to play him when I say so. Yeah, that sounds totally reasonable.
But when you really break down what he's saying, he's basically telling us, without telling us, Shedeur Sanders is not ready to be the number 2 quarterback in Cleveland. And the way he mentioned Dylan Gabriel in the same breath, that was calculated. He's comparing Shedeur to other young players on the roster, talking about how you have to think long and hard before making changes, because these are young players that you're so invested in their development. Translation: I don't trust Shedeur Sanders to go out there and run this offense if something happens to our starter. Now, before the Shedeur fans come at me in the comments, let's be real about something. This is not a ringing endorsement. When your head coach can't even say, yes, he's my QB2, without going on a 2-minute ramble about development and roster decisions, that's a massive red flag. And the analysts who were breaking this down? They caught it immediately. One analyst straight up said what everyone was thinking. Stefanski is basically screaming, this kid's not ready and I don't want to play him, without actually saying those words. And here's the kicker. He compared Shedeur to Bailey Zappi, who's on the practice squad right now. Bailey Zappi, a journeyman quarterback who's bounced around the league. And the reasoning? At least Zappi has NFL snaps under his belt. At least he knows what it's like to be on an NFL field during a real game. The analyst made this brutal point. If Stefanski had to put Shedeur Sanders in there right now, the Browns would have absolutely no shot at moving the ball. That's devastating. We're not talking about a kid who needs time to develop into a star. We're talking about a quarterback who, according to the coaching staff's body language, might not even be able to run basic NFL plays right now. And you know what the craziest part is? This is actually a no-win situation for Stefanski. Think about it. If Shedeur goes in and succeeds, everyone's going to be like, why didn't you play him from the beginning? You were holding back Prime's son. But if he fails, oh man, they're going to say Stefanski set him up to fail, threw him into the fire too early, destroyed his confidence. The coach is in a real catch-22 here. But here's where things get really uncomfortable. And I need you to pay attention, because this is where the story takes a dark turn. Another analyst came out and said something that's gonna make a lot of people mad. But we gotta talk about it because it's being discussed in NFL circles right now. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if the Browns can't say definitively that Shedeur is their QB2, that's an indictment of both Shedeur Sanders and the Browns organization. Because what that really means is they shouldn't have kept him on the roster to begin with. There was no reason to start the season with him if he wasn't ready. And if he's still not ready in Week 6? That raises the question, why is he still here? Now, this is where it gets spicy. The analyst suggested that the Browns are keeping Shedeur out of some sort of political or fear factor or some other agenda other than what's best for our roster. Let that sink in for a second. He's saying the Browns might be keeping Shedeur Sanders on the roster. Not because he's the best option, not because he's earned it, but because of some external pressure, some agenda that has nothing to do with winning football games. And before you think that's just some hot take from a hater, multiple people in that conversation agreed with him. They were all nodding their heads like, yeah, something doesn't add up here. So what could this agenda be? What kind of pressure would make an NFL team keep a quarterback who their own coaching staff doesn't seem to believe in? Well, one theory that came up is the playbook situation. Maybe Shedeur just doesn't know the playbook yet. Maybe after a full off-season and training camp, he's still struggling to grasp the offensive scheme. And look, if that's true, that's actually worse for Shedeur. Because if you can't learn an NFL playbook after months of being in the building, after all that time in meetings and practice, then you're not NFL ready. Period. One of the analysts made this exact point. He said, if Shedeur doesn't know the playbook after a full offseason, that means he should have been cut. Because what does that tell you about his ability to process information? What does that tell you about his work ethic? What does that tell you about whether he's taking this seriously? And here's the thing that's making this even messier. Shedeur is the third-string quarterback. You know what that means? He's not getting real reps. He's running scout team. He's simulating the other team's offense for the starters to practice against. He's not learning the Browns' playbook at full speed because he's not getting those QB1 reps. So if he doesn't know it by now, when is he supposed to learn it? But then, someone in the conversation brought up a counterpoint that actually makes you think. They said, look, maybe the Browns are trying to protect him. Maybe they're thinking, this kid might have been a second or third-round talent that fell to the fifth round. If we cut him and put him on waivers, another team might snatch him up. So we keep him on the roster, even if he's not ready right now, because in a year or two, he might actually be something. And you know what? That's not a crazy theory. We've seen it work before. Jordan Love sat for years behind Aaron Rodgers, and now look at him. He's having an incredible career. Would Jordan Love be the quarterback he is today if he'd been thrown into the fire on day one? Probably not. He needed time to learn what it means to be an NFL player. He needed to go up against NFL talent in practice. He needed to figure out the timing, the speed, the complexity of the pro game. Even Patrick Mahomes, arguably the best quarterback in the league, sat behind Alex Smith for a year before he took over. And we all know how that turned out. So maybe the Browns are thinking, let's not destroy this kid's confidence by throwing him out there when he's not ready. Let's develop him slowly, protect him from the media circus, and see what he becomes. That actually sounds reasonable? Like, maybe Stefanski is doing Shedeur a favor by not naming him QB2. Maybe he's protecting him from a situation where he'd go out there, look terrible. And then the narrative becomes Shedeur Sanders is a bust before he even had a real chance. But here's where that theory falls apart. If that was really the plan, if this was truly about development and patience, then why all the secrecy? Why can't Stefanski just come out and say, look, Shedeur is talented, but he's not ready yet. We're developing him for the future. Why all the vague working through roster things nonsense? Unless the real reason they can't cut him has nothing to do with his development, and everything to do with WHO, his father. And WHO wanted him on this team in the first place, because here's what nobody's saying out loud, but everyone's thinking, no coach wants to sit his best players. Kevin Stefanski is fighting for his job right now. The Browns are a mess. His seat is getting hotter by the week. And coaches in that position don't have the luxury of keeping quarterbacks on the roster for political reasons or because of external pressure, unless that pressure is coming from someone they can't say no to. Someone like the owner. And that's when things started clicking into place during this entire discussion. One analyst brought up a name that changed the entire conversation. Jimmy Haslam, the owner of the Cleveland Browns. And the moment that name was mentioned, you could feel the energy shift. Because if Jimmy Haslam's fingerprints are on this decision, then everything we just talked about, the development plan, the protecting Shedeur theory, all of it, that might just be smoke and mirrors. Because Jimmy Haslam has a track record, a wild track record. And when it comes to quarterbacks, this man has made some of the most bizarre, head-scratching decisions in NFL history. Remember when the Browns were in the war room on draft day when they selected Shedeur? People analyzed Andrew Berry's body language, the general manager, and it did not look like a guy who wanted to draft Shedeur Sanders in round 5. He looked uncomfortable. He looked like someone who was being told what to do rather than making his own decision. And now, Here we are in week 6, and the head coach can't even commit to Shedeur being the backup quarterback. The coaching staff clearly doesn't think he's ready. The analytics guys are saying he should have been cut. Everything points to this being a bad roster decision. So why is Shedeur Sanders still on the Cleveland Browns? The answer might be simpler than we think, and way more dysfunctional. Because if there's one thing Jimmy Haslam loves to do, it's meddle in football decisions that he has no business making. And if there's one person Jimmy Haslam might want to stay on good terms with, it's Deion Sanders. Primetime, a cultural icon with massive influence in football. Think about it. What if Haslam promised Deion something? What if he told Prime, "Don't worry, we'll take care of your son. We'll develop him. He's got a future here"? And now, even though the football people in the building are saying, this kid isn't ready, Haslam is forcing them to keep Shedeur on the roster because he doesn't want to go back on his word to one of the most famous athletes in America? That would explain everything. It would explain why Stefanski can't give a straight answer. It would explain why Bailey Zapp, AT, practice squad quarterback, is being considered over the guy who's supposedly QB2. It would explain why analysts are talking about political agendas and fear factors. Because if the owner is forcing the coaching staff to keep a player they don't believe in, that's not football. That's politics. That's ego. That's everything that makes bad franchises stay bad. And look, I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This is not about hating on Shedeur Sanders. This is about exposing what might be happening behind the scenes in Cleveland. Because if Shedeur is being kept on this roster for reasons that have nothing to do with his ability or readiness, that's not fair to him either. He's being set up in a situation where he can't win, where the coaches don't want to play him, but they can't cut him, where he's not getting real development, but he's also not going somewhere that might actually believe in him. That's a disaster for everyone involved. For the Browns, for Stefanski, and most importantly, for Shedeur's career. But here's the thing that nobody's talking about yet, and this is where it gets really uncomfortable. There's another layer to this story. Another reason why the pressure to keep Shedeur might be coming from places that have nothing to do with football. And it has to do with race, representation, and the way the NFL treats black quarterbacks differently than white quarterbacks. Because while everyone's focused on whether Shedeur knows the playbook or whether he's ready for NFL speed, there's a much bigger conversation happening about why there's so much pressure on the Browns to play him in the first place. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around for part 2 of this story because things are about to get really deep. We're going to talk about Jimmy Haslam's history with quarterbacks, including that insane story about how he allegedly drafted Johnny Manziel. We're going to break down the race conversation that's being whispered about in NFL circles, but nobody wants to say out loud. And we're going to figure out what this all means for Shedeur's future. Because whether you love him or hate him, this kid's career is at a crossroads right now, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because part 2 is dropping soon and you do not want to miss it. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Stefanski is protecting Shedeur or trying to get rid of him? Is Jimmy Haslam forcing the Browns to keep Prime's son on the roster? Let me know what you think. All right, so we left off talking about Jimmy Haslam. And if you thought part 1 was crazy, buckle up, because this is where everything gets wild. One analyst straight up said it. From the beginning, the fingerprints of Jimmy Haslam were all over this. And when you look at the draft day footage, when you see Andrew Berry sitting in that war room, his body language told you everything. That did not look like a general manager who wanted to draft Shedeur Sanders in round 5. That looked like a guy who was being told what to do by someone above him who he couldn't say no to. And now we're in week 6, and Stefanski, the head coach, can't even commit to Shedeur being QB2. The football people don't believe in him. The coaches don't trust him. Everything about this screams bad football decision. But he's still here, still on the roster, still being protected. Why? Because Jimmy Haslam wants him here. And when Jimmy Haslam wants something, it doesn't matter what the coaches think, what the GM thinks, or what actually makes sense for winning football games. This is the same owner who has turned the Browns into a revolving door of coaches, quarterbacks, and disasters. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. You want to know how wild Jimmy Haslam's decision-making can get? Let me tell you a story that was verified by multiple reporters, and I swear I'm not making this up. Jimmy Haslam allegedly drafted Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football, because a homeless guy told him to. I'm dead serious. The story goes that Haslam was out somewhere, ran into a homeless person, and this person convinced him that Johnny Manziel was going to be a star. And Haslam took that advice and used a first-round pick on him. Now, whether that story is 100% accurate or slightly exaggerated doesn't even matter at this point. Because the fact that it's believable tells you everything you need to know about how this owner operates. This is a man who makes impulsive, emotional decisions about quarterbacks based on vibes, relationships, and everything except actual football evaluation. So, when people ask, why would Haslam force the Browns to keep Shedeur when the coaches don't want him? The answer is simple. Because Haslam doesn't care about what the coaches want. He wants to be best friends with Deion Sanders. He wants to be the guy who discovered Prime's son. He wants the clout that comes with having Coach Prime in his corner. And look, this isn't speculation anymore. Multiple analysts are saying the same thing. If Haslam wants Shedeur on this roster, he's staying on the roster. Period. The coaches can hint all they want. Stefanski can dodge questions all day. But until Jimmy Haslam says, cut him, Shedeur Sanders is a Cleveland Brown. One analyst put it perfectly. This is a weird owner who does weird things. And when a weird owner tells you to keep a third-string quarterback who can't beat out a practice squad guy for the QB2 spot, you keep him, even if it makes zero football sense, even if it's hurting the team, even if everyone in the building knows it's wrong. That's what dysfunction looks like. That's what happens when billionaires play Madden with real franchises. But here's where things get really uncomfortable. And I need you to hear me out because this is the part of the story that nobody wants to touch. There's another layer of pressure on the Browns to keep Shedeur, and it has nothing to do with Haslam or Deion or football evaluation. It has to do with race. Now, before you click off or leave a nasty comment, I'm not the one bringing this up. The analysts in this conversation brought it up. And they brought it up because it's being discussed in NFL circles, whether people want to admit it or not. Here's what they said. Back in the day, Steve McNair was a top 5 pick, 5th overall, and you know what happened? He sat for 2 years. Didn't play a single meaningful snap until his 3rd season with the Houston Oilers as they transitioned to Tennessee. And you know what the reaction was? Nothing. Nobody called the franchise racist. Nobody said they were sabotaging him. Nobody accused the organization of holding back a black quarterback because of his skin color. But today, in 2025, if a black quarterback isn't given what he wants immediately, if he's asked to sit and learn and develop like quarterbacks used to do, there's an assumption that the organization must be racist, that they're trying to undermine him, that there's some conspiracy to keep him off the field. And look, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist in the NFL. I'm not saying there haven't been black quarterbacks who were treated unfairly. But what I am saying is that the conversation around football has changed so much that teams are now scared to make normal football decisions because of how it'll be perceived. One analyst said it straight up. Now we live in this era where if a black quarterback isn't given what he wants immediately, well, there's only one explanation. The organization is racist, and they're trying to undermine him. And that creates insane pressure on franchises like the Browns. Because if they cut Shedeur or admit he's not ready, social media is going to explode. The headlines are going to write themselves. Browns give up on Deion's son after one season. Is Cleveland racist? Another black QB denied his shot. Never mind that Shedeur might actually not be ready. Never mind that the coaches might genuinely be trying to protect his development. Never mind that this might be what's best for his career long term. The narrative will be that the Browns sabotaged him because of race, so they're stuck. They can't play him because he's not ready, but they can't cut him because of the backlash. And Jimmy Haslam, who already wanted to keep him for his own reasons, now has even more reason to force the team to hold on to Shedeur. It's a perfect storm of dysfunction, politics, and fear. But here's the thing, and this is where I need to keep it real with you. Some of the criticism of Shedeur, it's legitimate. It's not about race. It's about behavior and readiness. During the preseason, Shedeur's performance was rough. Like really rough. Analysts who broke down his tape said he was inaccurate, made poor decisions, and just looked terrible. And then there's his behavior off the field. The way he's been trolling Dylan Gabriel on social media. The whole "I'm not commenting" act when asked about football questions. One analyst said it perfectly. Everything about him says immature, spoiled, not ready, petulant. And look, those are harsh words. But if you've been following Shedeur's social media, you know there's some truth to it. The kid acts like he's already a star when he hasn't proven anything at the NFL level yet. So for the Browns to be holding on to him with the thought that in a year or two, he's got so much talent we can get something out of him. One analyst said he's lost faith in that. He doesn't see it anymore. The talent isn't overcoming the immaturity, and that's the real tragedy here. Because if Shedeur was actually putting in the work, being humble, learning the playbook, and showing that he's coachable, this conversation would be totally different. But when you combine questionable on-field performance with immature off-field behavior, you get a player that coaches don't want to invest in. So where does this leave us? What does all of this mean for Shedeur Sanders' future? Here's my honest take, and Shedeur fans, you might actually want to hear this part. Maybe, just maybe, the Browns keeping him on the roster is the right move. Not because of Haslam's ego, not because of race politics, but because throwing Shedeur into game action right now would absolutely destroy his career. Think about it. The Browns are a dumpster fire. Their offensive line is trash. They have no weapons. The play calling is questionable at best. If Shedeur goes in there and gets hit 10 times, throws 3 picks, and looks completely lost, the narrative becomes Shedeur Sanders is a bust, and he might never recover from that. But if they keep him on the roster, let him learn without pressure, develop behind the scenes, and actually give him time to mature, both as a player and as a person, he might actually have a shot at becoming something. Because here's what nobody wants to admit. Shedeur has talent. The kid can throw the football. He has arm strength. He has confidence. He has that prime-time DNA. But talent without readiness is just wasted potential. And right now, Shedeur Sanders is not ready for prime time. No pun intended. So maybe Stefanski refusing to name him QB2 isn't an insult. Maybe it's actually the smartest thing the Browns have done all season. Maybe protecting Shedeur from himself, from the pressure, from a situation where he has no chance to succeed. Maybe that's what's best for his long-term career. And if the Browns can give him a year or two to actually develop, to learn what it means to be a professional, to understand that social media clout doesn't equal NFL readiness, then maybe Shedeur Sanders becomes the quarterback everyone thought he could be when Colorado was rolling. But that only happens if he's willing to put in the work. If he's willing to be humble. If he's willing to accept that he's not there yet. And that's okay. Because the worst thing that could happen to Shedeur isn't sitting on the bench in Cleveland. The worst thing would be getting thrown into the fire before he's ready, failing spectacularly, and never getting another real shot. So here's where we're at. Kevin Stefanski won't commit to Shedeur being QB2 because he's not ready. Jimmy Haslam might be forcing the Browns to keep him for political and ego reasons. There's race-related pressure making it harder to make normal football decisions. And Shedeur himself has shown some concerning behavior that makes coaches question his readiness. But through all of that dysfunction, there might actually be a path forward for Shedeur Sanders. It requires patience, humility, and development. It requires the Browns to ignore the noise and focus on what's actually best for the player. And it requires Shedeur to grow up and take this opportunity seriously. Can that happen? We'll see. But one thing's for sure. The Cleveland Browns situation is a mess. And Shedeur Sanders is right in the middle of it. If you made it this far, drop a comment letting me know. Is Stefanski protecting Shedeur or sabotaging him? Is Jimmy Haslam ruining another quarterback? And most importantly, does Shedeur have what it takes to prove the doubters wrong? Hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already, and turn on notifications because we're covering every twist and turn of this story. The NFL is wild right now, and we're just getting started. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. See you in the next one. Peace.